From the 2008 recession up through the past few years of booming sales and rising prices, and into the potentially unknown waters of a recession in 2023, where is the antiques industry headed? Will mid-century modern continue to rule, or will the old world aesthetic come back into play? I'm Gregory with Old Europe Antique Home Furnishings, and it's time for another episode of Antique Acquisitions. Hello my antique loving friends, and welcome back. So let's get into this topic with an introduction by the antique sage discussing the recession in 2008. The year 2008 will forever stand as a stark dividing line in the history of antique collecting. There was the time before 2008 when many categories of collectibles were still relatively vibrant and active. And then there is the time after 2008 when many traditional collectibles markets such as china, glass, furniture, etc., collapsed in price. What is the one key element that divides these two disparate time periods? The answer is the Great Recession of 2008-2009. This seminal event has reverberated throughout the antique collecting and investment market like an earthquake, right up to the present day. And I don't think we can argue with that, because we know how much prices dropped after the recession. And I think probably if you look back over the last 7 years or so, you've seen a gradual rise in prices since that time due to several factors. One, interest rates were extremely low to encourage the economy, and that's going to result in an expansion of the money supply and inflation. And the other being that in 2020, when you had the restrictions and you had the lockdowns and you had the supply chain problems, a tremendous amount of money was printed to stimulate the economy, and that too increased the prices of everything in general. So inflation is the underlying factor over the last 6 or 7 years that promotes rising prices in many industries, not just antiques. And unless we get into such a serious situation in the economy that people simply can't buy, as happened in 2008, then you would expect this inflation to continue as the money printing continues. So what I want to do is start off with the Ashford Institute's annual survey of top decorative arts buying trends from the past 12 months. That will give us a really good idea of what's been hot over the last 12 months. And I suppose you could extrapolate that trend into the near future as well. So basically, the International Survey Poll is a poll of past students and graduates from the Ashford Institute. This study should give us some unique insights into the industry due to its unique ability to look into the current state of today's decorative arts marketplace as it relates to overall sales trends for dealers working within the community. The survey results are based on receiving actual sales data alongside item-specific requests from buyers, which can then be used to indicate interest within a particular collecting genre. As with virtually all businesses this past year, ongoing supply chain issues continue to have an effect on almost every segment of the economy, including certain genres within the decorative arts field. In 2021, we were all still recovering from lockdowns and restrictions, but this past year, buyers and dealers and collectors were out en masse, in person, and were literally snapping up everything in sight. Virtually anything from folk art to baseball cards. Similar tales have surfaced in previous years, but those scenarios were not close to the severe shortage of available stock that many antique and vintage dealers faced in 2022. The survey goes on to note that item listing values skyrocketed in virtually every area in 2022, and dealers took advantage by holding firm on their prices. Fan favorites like Art Deco and textiles continued to boom, while other perennial factors such as mid-century modern began to show signs of weakening. There's definitely a shift. It's just a matter of being able to pick up those markets before they become full-fledged trends. Some collecting categories in this year's poll may have risen or fallen not necessarily because of a lack of popularity, but because of a lack of stable inventory. However, the upside to all the market uncertainty for most dealers was that sales prices rose sharply. So what we may be seeing here is a slight weakening in the mid-century modern trend, the minimalism that has gone with that, and later on I will present some evidence or opinions from another survey from Better Homes and Gardens as to that trend shifting towards the old money aesthetic, those timeless classics that have had value for not just the last decade, but for decade after decade after decade, and they just keep getting older. Now, more information about the survey. The following survey was conducted from January 22nd to December 22nd by research staff at the Ashford Institute. It consisted of a sampling of over 2,264 current students and past graduates that are actively employed or working within the antiques, collectibles, and vintage marketplaces within the United States and Canada, and that's both urban and rural areas. All of those who participate in the survey operate their own antiques and vintage or estate sale appraisal businesses, including online concerns, and are listed as proprietors in the survey. So these are people that should know what's going on. They should have the pulse of the industry. The focus of the survey was directed towards interest in current market trends with the antiques, vintage, and collectible community based on sales and requests for particular items, genre, periods from customers and clients. The survey was informal in nature and therefore did not employ any standardized or measurable scientific practices or criteria in obtaining results. The survey results were categorized by the age group of the proprietors, indicating item, genre, period specific preferences most popular to each of these groupings. So the item, genre, period listings and their relative popularity with consumers were represented by a potential numerical scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the most popular and 10 being the least popular. It's been another unusual year for dealers, with inflationary upticks in prices and sourcing issues being common complaints. There has also been some resounding success stories, as on-site sales have generally soared across the board for many in the industry. Changing trends were also on display as the pull away from full-on modernism continues, with a number of decorative art styles now being influenced by popular streaming offerings from shows like Netflix's Bridgerton and its creation of the revival Regency Corps, as well as early episodes of The Crown promoting the grandeur of the Edwardian era. For those with less formal interests, the 80s is now back with linen and floral themed textiles and deco inspired waterfall furniture that's hitting some high notes with younger dealers. Mid-century modern remains popular in secondary urban areas, but its overall shine appears to have diminished somewhat with those residing in larger coastal cities. That's interesting, right? Because usually you think that the trends start on the coast and move inward, so we'll see. Now, let's move on to the poll survey here and see what we can learn from that. The way that the survey was conducted, they divided up their students into categories: the 20 to 40 age range of proprietors and the 40 to 60 age range of proprietors. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the rankings for the 20 to 40 age group proprietors. I'm not going to go through every single genre I am going to kind of hit the highlights here. Okay, so the number one category for the 20 to 40 year age group of dealers is textiles. Those include branded jeans, handbags, and top name kicks. The second most popular category in the younger dealers is waterfall, edge, and Art Deco revival. 1980s Art Deco revival. So we're getting that 1920s, 30s feel that we had back in the 80s. It came back in, now apparently is coming back around once more. And that takes us to Art Deco as its own category. While many of the youngest buyers might be favoring 80s Art Deco revival pieces, the slightly older millennials seem more content with having the real thing. Almost all dealers from this age category reported exceptionally good sales for literally anything Art Deco. The demand for authentic items rose again this year, according to many dealers, and so did the prices. Leading the sales pack were case pieces such as cabinets, dressers, and armoires. Smalls were also popular, with table lamps, ashtrays, clocks, objects of art, all selling well. This is the third year in a row that Deco has remained in the top 3 in this category, with some poll respondents seeing it as a long-term hold, in much the same way mid-century modern has been for the last 10 years. Speaking of mid-century modern, that is the 4th highest category for the 20 to 40 year old dealers. And it says, while mid-century modern may have dropped a notch or two over the last few years, its overall appeal with buyers and collectors is still by and large one of the most consistent within the decorative arts community. So there you go. Moving on to number 5, kitchen and barware. That's the 5th most popular category, is kitchen and barware. Number 6, 6th most popular category, space collectibles. That has things to do with space exploration, and it notes that the popularity being almost entirely tied to what NASA does or doesn't do in any given year. So, the 7th category is Victorian. That includes early, mid, and late Victorian, and for those of you who don't know, that's 1837 to 1901, and might be extended to include 1820 to 1914 for conversational purposes. So what do they have to say about that? Yes, you read it right. While not even a blip on many dealers' charts last year, Victorian era furniture has suddenly surged in popularity, due in part to a group of buyers who until very recently were more aware of IKEA as a brand than the English monarch and the style named after her that ruled the Western decorative art scene for almost 70 years. But just as millennials and Gen Xers have grown and changed over time, so has their taste for reuse and recycling. Antique show dealers and East Coast pickers are reporting that traditionally, cash-poor Gen Xers are continuing to snap up reasonably priced Victorian pieces as an alternative to buying flat pack and new, with an eye to helping the environment. Practical items from tables, desks, and benches to chests of drawers and chairs took top billing. But dealers noted that smaller items and decorative pieces were also starting to sell well. While not quite of the Bridgerton era, as far as the decor goes, many dealers have nonetheless attributed the recent rise in Victorian interest to the popularity of the Netflix series and its historical depiction of the decorative arts. It couldn't have anything to do with the quality construction, the solid wood, the hand carvings that you find in the Victorian era. Or could it? Early Americana and Canadiana comes in at number 8. The 9th category is Lucite and the 1970s. Modular furniture and Lucite pieces continue to bring in the buyers searching for that perfect representation of the me decade from the 1970s. And the lowest category is tin, which is lighting. Although dropping 3 spots this year, lighting has continued to be a relatively popular choice with dealers. Examples from the Victorian era to mid-century modern and lava lamps of the 1970s, along with custom-made pieces, continue to be sought after by dealers. All right, now let's move on to the other grouping of students that they surveyed, which are the 40 to 60-year-old proprietors and dealers. The number one, the top category for dealers in the 40 to 60-year-old age bracket is Art Deco. For a number of dealers in this category, the question over the last few years has always been whether or not Art Deco has the staying power to remove MCM from its throne. Investing in inventory can be pricey for both styles, but MCM has the added advantage of popular longevity on its side, while Art Deco is a relative newcomer to the list. Many dealers from this age group have finally thrown in their hats and say they are now fully committed to the Art Deco trend. So again, the Art Deco trend, number one for 40 to 60 year age group dealers, tells me that the old money aesthetic is starting to come back. But number two for the 40 to 60 year old dealers is textiles, which is significant. So we make note of that here. It says, just as with the younger generation of dealers, the textile movement has now spread itself out to virtually every type of vendor within the decorative arts marketplace. So there you have it. Number three, the third highest category, is automobilia. No longer a niche collectible. Dealers in this category who specialize particularly in areas like signage and tinware have seen exponential growth over the last few years. So that's the third category. The fourth category is mid-century modern. Although this area of collecting has seen some fluctuation with dealers in this category over the last year or two, it still remains a strong puller for most of those who invested in its stock. While the range of buyers may have diminished somewhat from the uber trendy and hip to a more segmented mid-country niche, dealers say there's still plenty of overall interest across the board in almost all facets of the style. So there you go, mid-century modern is still hanging in there, the number fourth highest demanded category. Number five, Victorian, early, mid, and late. So Victorian is now on the heels of mid-century modern, no longer just a rising favorite amongst younger dealers and millennial consumers. The growth of Victoriana has also caught the attention of middle-aged dealers as well. Like much of the furniture market, sales of Victorian items have also been on the upswing recently, as the end of pandemic restrictions has spurred not only antique and vintage markets, but furniture sales in general. Dealers are reporting that customers are continuing to complain about long times from overseas manufacturers for contemporary pieces, which in turn is motivating many of them to reevaluate their decisions when it comes to decorating options and wait times. And I can attest to that. I've had customers that tell me chairs are too expensive, leather takes forever to get here. So I can definitely believe that's true. Now, the sixth category is costume jewelry. It says there seems to be no end in sight to the public's fascination for costume jewelry. Ranking overall at 5 last year, this area of collecting continues to remain steady and strong across almost all age groups of collectors and buyers. Number 7, Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau comes in at 7 in the 40 to 60-year-old age category of dealers for what their customers want. Rising onto the charts this year for the first time since 2020, many dealers from this category are attributing the public's renewed interest in the Art Nouveau style to its timely connection to Art Deco's recent rise in popularity. Online sales for smalls and other objects of art have grown dramatically, according to many dealers in urban areas, as corollary interest by buyers of mid-century modern pieces seems to have sparked a return to more sinuous and gracious lines for some collectors. According to sellers, Art Nouveau items tend to blend easily with almost any design format, making them especially desirable to the younger urbanites. Dealers continue to note a shortage of good available stock and subsequent rise in asking prices from pickers. Lighting comes in at number 8. Number 9, paintings and sculptures. Moving beyond the realm of just furnished and geometric jewelry, Art Deco also made its presence felt in more established artistic endeavors as well. Prices and interest in early 20th century artists rise sharply. Number 10, vinyl records. Collectors of a certain age, it would seem, are continuing to push the price of vinyl records and their accompanying album covers to new heights. There is one more category of dealers and proprietors here that we're going to finish up with, and that is the 60 to 80 year olds. Believe it or not, the number one category demanded by their customers was Chinese antiques. Last year's number 6, Chinese antiques have once again risen to the top of the senior bowl. While this area of collecting has been popular with older established dealers and more advanced collectors for years, recent turmoil and strained relations between the West and China have put a damper on the open exchange of goods and related information. Despite such restrictions, many dealers say they have continued to see strong numbers. Second most popular, mid-century modern. It was just 7 short years ago that dealers from this category reported virtually no sales of mid-century modern whatsoever. Since that time, senior dealers have not only been steadily adding to their MCM stock, but have done so in such a way that many of these established vendors have now become responsible for the majority of higher-end pieces being sold in today's marketplace. While many of the senior pole residents declared that their overall MCM furniture sales had increased over the last 12 months, there was also a vocal minority indicating a stagnation of interest. So there you go. Third most popular category, toys and board games. The fourth most demanded category for the 60 to 80 crowd is of dealers, Georgian style. Now, isn't that interesting? We haven't seen this come up in either of the other two demographics for dealers. So here you have it, Georgian style. That's 1714 to 1847. Now that's a proper antique, pre-industrial antique. Slowly but surely, a number of senior dealers are beginning to express some positive numbers related to sales of Georgian furniture. Whether this recent uptick in popularity is due in part to the image of stately rooms and accompanying furniture as shown in Netflix Bridgerton and Crown series is unknown, but what is known is that more and more people are being exposed to the decorative fineries of the Georgian period now more than ever before. Younger collectors may have only witnessed modern motifs in the past and now suddenly able to experience the grandeur of decorative themes from the Georgian era, leaving them perhaps wanting for more than just the look of an IKEA or a crate and barrel inspired room. Most dealers say they're encouraged by the rising prices from this category. So there you have it. That's what we talked about in the preface to this video, is the old money aesthetic, you know. And for years you've had Downton Abbey, and now you've got Bridgerton and some of these other shows. The Crown kind of seems to be coming back a little bit. The fifth most popular category is Art Deco period jewelry. While many of the younger dealers seem focused on Deco's rise within the furniture scene, older dealers are resting their backs and have instead turn their attention towards smaller examples such as jewelry. All right, the sixth category, Victorian. So look here, in the fourth, fifth, and sixth highest ranked categories for dealers from the 60 to 80 year group is Georgian, Art Deco, and Victorian. Like almost all the other categories, the nascent resurgence of interest in Victorian furniture seems to have been sparked by millennials and Gen Zers looking for a bargain. However, for many dealers from this age group, the timing couldn't have been better, as items that were languishing in back rooms have now been dusted and brought back onto showroom floors. As post-pandemic foot traffic increased, so did sales. While prices were still down overall, certain items or styles from within the era, along with particular pieces such as marble-topped washstands and side tables, are not only selling well, but are back to commanding almost full price. For many of these older dealers, this is a welcome sight after almost 20 years of depressed values. And I would add that I do notice that your Georgian pieces and your 17th century pieces as well, in my view, are not bringing what they are worth. They're not reflecting the age and history that they embody. Sooner or later, that's got to change. That's got to change. All right, the seventh category here is watches, both antique and vintage. So that's enough said on that. Now, this is interesting and probably partly a response to obvious inflationary pressures. Silver, marching up ever so slightly from 10 to 8 on this year's list. Silver has finally begun to move in the right direction, at least according to a number of silver-haired dealers. Architectural antiques. Even as house prices dropped and renovations stalled this year, dealers from this category say they still managed to do quite well. Architectural antiques for homes, those would include things like doors, windows. The last category, number 10, ephemera. While post-pandemic sales numbers have dropped somewhat this past year, ephemera is still quite popular and profitable with many of the older dealers. All right, so that in a nutshell is the results of the survey, and what we can take away from that, I suppose, is that while mid-century modern still seems to be strong, we do see some inroads being made in the more traditional classic antique furniture. And by classic, I don't necessarily mean classical. I've also got the heavily carved Renaissance style furniture from the 19th century, and I suspect that at some point in time, all of the quality furniture that was made in the 18th and 19th centuries is going to be valued for not only the quality of wood, but also its historic value, and that's going to happen. I don't know when. You know, the prices are rising, but I don't know that that's any more than a response to inflation. But sooner or later, you have to think that those items would become more valued. So, continuing on that theme, I want to take a look at a Better Homes and Gardens article, and it's titled "Old Money Decor is the Timeless Look Taking Over Interiors." It says there is a fresh decorating trend on the scene, and it's rich. We're saying goodbye to the new and flashy and hello to a blast from the past that's anything but boring. The old money aesthetic is taking the design and fashion worlds by storm, with no sign of letting up anytime soon. This style grounds itself in classically chic pieces with staying power. You'll be able to spot the old money aesthetic almost instantly if you pay attention to what meets the eye and then what's below, above, and behind it. Old money homes and old money aesthetic are filled with layers of curiosities and objects of interest collected as hobby and testimony of a life well traveled. And I think that's a key thing here, is at what point do we see the switch from modern minimalism to the desire to be surrounded by these types of historical objects of curiosity and interest. That is an interesting theme. Call it backlash against the open concept living we have been doing for the past decade. Now we want our homes layered with meaningful decor choices and cozy landing spots. The article goes on. They say we are craving a return to the familiar and almost nostalgic decor we knew in years past as we gravitate towards more traditional rooms. For those who have fallen prey to swapping out their decor as the trends come and go, this return to a style of yesteryear can't come soon enough. Rather than constantly reinventing your space, there's something very appealing about a timeless look that's always represented chic taste and lasting style. With all that being said, I want to wrap up with a quote, once again from Antique Sage. he says, if you're interested in collecting, stick to the investment grade antiques that have a high probability of appreciating in the future. And that's not investment advice from me. I'm no investment advisor, but that is the niche that this store, Old Europe Antique Home Furnishing, attempts to occupy. And remember, during a time of inflation, real things have value as fiat currency declines in value. And with that, I will wish you a wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.